Hello and welcome to the Chatty Boy podcast, episode number 3. I will actually try and get this one out on time this week. A lot of technical issues last week with everything on the channel. Yeah, I didn't get the Chatty Boy podcast out on time for Wednesday because my time management is fucking piss poor. And then Friday, hilarious name pending, the video didn't export correctly and only uploaded half a video to YouTube. But hopefully nobody actually noticed, so we'll find out. And today I promise. Well, I say promise. I hope that this will be out on time, that it will be out on Wednesday, because today is an episode that I honestly didn't think I was going to be making, to be fair. Because I didn't think what happened would actually happen, in the least bit. Despite all the promise and all the kind of hype surrounding this very specific event I'm going to talk about. And that event is UFC 217. UFC 217 that took place this weekend just gone. Now this fight card was fucking ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Beforehand, before the event, when I'd seen it, when we knew who was going to be fighting, had 3 title fights in one UFC event. 3 title fights that could have easily been the main event in their own UFC shows. And yet somehow, someway, the UFC thought it would be a good idea to put 3 of these title fights, these 3 massive fights, onto one card in New York, in Madison Square Gardens. Madison Square Garden? Madison... Is it Gardens or Garden? Madison Square Garden. Yeah, it's Garden. Because there's not more than one. It's singular. There's only one garden that is square that belongs to Madison. Madison Square? No. Madison Square Garden. MSG. Yeah, they decided to squeeze these three fights that could have easily been headliners in their own right, onto this one card. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting much of it. I wasn't expecting much from these fights, because normally, when you have a card like this, it either falls apart or doesn't live up to the hype. And it didn't fall apart. Everyone weighed in, everyone was fine, the fights went ahead as scheduled. But witnessing what I witnessed on that night, on that evening, witnessing UFC 217, seeing the absolute glory of it and how it just embodied the sport of MMA perfectly. It was unfucking believable. So I'm going to talk through those 3 ridiculous title fights, because each one of them was utterly surprising to me, and I think to a lot of other UFC fans as well. So first up, I'm about to pronounce a Polish name. This is going to go well. First up, you had Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Rose Namajunas. Now, Joanna is the champion. Well, was the champion. Spoilers. Joanna is considered one of the best female fighters in the UFC, probably in mixed martial arts to date. She is an absolute killer. Someone that I would definitely rate above Ronda Rousey. She steamrolls everybody that she fights and makes absolutely light work of them. She faces these extremely tough, extremely talented, extremely skilled fighters, and makes them look amateur. She's hands down one of the best strikers in MMA. Like, that kickboxing pedigree of hers, you know, it shines through in the UFC. It makes her an absolute freak of a woman. She calls herself the Boogie Woman, which I think is entirely justified considering her work ethic, her work rate, and how she utterly dismantles every opponent she faces. And at UFC 217, she came up against Rose Namajunas. Now, she had a bit of a rocky start to her UFC career, losing to Carla Esparza for the strawweight title in 2014. Now, that fight was the inaugural outing of the title. It was they had an entire Ultimate Fighter season leading up to that finale, that final fight to decide who would be this new strawweight champion in a new and established division in the UFC. Rose lost that fight, but since then, she has been developing and learning as young fighters do, because Rose is only 25 years old. She's actually younger than me, which is fucking shocking and makes me question my own life achievements. Which means when she actually fought for the title the first time around, she was only 22. Very young, very inexperienced, but still a killer. But her development has been impressive, slowly getting better and better with each fight, becoming a more well-rounded MMA fighter. She became known more as a submission expert in recent fights, which is where people thought this fight with Joanna would actually go to. Many people were predicting that Rose's key to success would be in taking down Joanna and trying to defeat her on the ground, because nobody thought that anybody could stand and strike with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So the fight kicks off. Joanna was trying to find her range, but she couldn't quite find it, which I thought was quite interesting. She normally finds it pretty quickly and establishes herself striking-wise. She didn't do that as quickly as I thought she would, or as quickly as she normally does. Early on in that round, in the first round, the opening round, she threw a kick, which Rose actually countered with a punch and earned her the knockdown, which raised a lot of fucking eyebrows, mine included, to see Joanna Jędrzejczyk get knocked down in the first round by a striker that isn't in any way or any shape, literally has no business striking with Joanna in terms of skill. But she knocked her down. Joanna bounced back up. She seemed quite shaky though, not entirely with it. And then in a later exchange, Rose clipped her with a vicious, vicious right, and you just see the entire life drain out of Joanna. Her arm went limp. Her left arm literally went limp, and it went behind her back. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. She got hit that hard that she just went completely limp. Her entire body just went limp. She went from a fighting stance to her arms dropped behind her side, one behind her back. She fell onto her left arm behind her back. That's how fucked up that punch was. That's how hard Rose caught her and how perfectly timed that punch was. Rose then jumped on top of Joanna and just pounded her and just kept going at it, knowing that the belt was in sight for her. And eventually, Joanna Jędrzejczyk had to tap due to strikes, making Rose Namajunas the new undisputed strawweight champion. And I couldn't fucking believe it. Out of all these fights, or out of all these title fights on this card, that one for me was the most dead cert. I thought Namajunas had no business being in there with Joanna. But fuck me. I couldn't believe it, how focused she was, how stoic she was all the way through the lead-up. She was ready for this fight, more than many people gave her credit for. And she went in there and she took it. She took the belt from one of the most vicious female fighters within one round. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I was like, wow, this fight is incredible. If any of these fights that follow it even are half as good or half as impressive as this one, then we're in for a treat. And my God, did this card live up to the challenge. It didn't end there. It did not end there at all. So we move on from that shock defeat of Joanna Jędrzejczyk to Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw. And this was for the Bantamweight Championship. Now, there's a lot of bad blood between these two, something to do with training camps and TJ leaving American Top Team? No. TJ leaving Alpha Male, Cody's training camp. I don't know. There's a lot of bollocks surrounding this fight. A lot of hype and hysteria leading up to it. A lot of them two butting heads, and it made for interesting fodder leading up to the fight and kind of gave it a lot of hype, but I'm not going to get into that bollocks, because to be honest, at this point you don't know who's telling the truth, who said what. Is Cody right? Is TJ right? But that's beyond the point right now, because eventually, after all that bollocks of them going back and forth, they finally got in the octagon to settle the score. Now, Cody Garbrandt is a boxing expert. He has phenomenal timing and speed and ridiculous power. Last year, when he won the title, he defeated and basically embarrassed Dominic Cruz, easily regarded as one of the greatest bantamweight champions of all time, Dominic Cruz. And Cody Garbrandt just made a mess of him, was dancing around the octagon, pointing at him, laughing at him, talking to him, making a mockery of Dominic Cruz, which was shocking, and it was a star was born in Cody Garbrandt because of that. He popped up on a lot of people's radars. Now, the thing with Cody is his boxing is so good and so perfect that he relies on it quite a lot. He is quite a one-dimensional fighter because of it. Now, the guy he was facing, though, TJ Dillashaw, is an entirely different beast. He is the epitome of a well-rounded mixed martial artist. He is fast, he's got good movement, he has a slew of weapons at his disposal that he's not afraid to use either. He can go from straight hand strikes to head kicks to wrestling, jiu-jitsu. This guy's got the entire game of mixed martial arts down to a T. I mean, this guy is so good, unbelievably good. He actually fought Dominic Cruz himself a couple of years back and lost a very close decision. Many thought that TJ actually won that fight and that he should have retained the belt. I should mention, he was the bantamweight champion whilst Dominic Cruz was on hiatus. I'm not going to go through the entire history of the UFC. Come on. When you watch TJ fight, you kind of see that this is the future of mixed martial arts. This is what it means to be a mixed martial artist right now. And to be honest, he showed that in this fight. So in the first round of this fight, Cody Garbrandt was easily getting the better of the exchanges. Why is exchanges? Cody Garbrandt was getting the better of the exchanges. Fucking idiot. I don't even know why I try. But yeah, he was countering TJ, moving just out of the way of his attacks. He actually knocked him down at the end of the first as well. TJ was literally saved by the klaxon. It was a perfectly timed counter punch from Cody Garbrandt that put TJ on his arse. And when he stood up as well after the klaxon, TJ looked completely fucked, completely out of it. He was wobbling everywhere. It was very, very impressive display from Cody Garbrandt in the first round. To be honest, you could kind of see the direction that the fight may have been going, that it was all about Cody finding his rhythm, finding his place in the octagon against TJ. So the second round starts. TJ is still kind of visibly shaken. He's very flat-footed. In the first, he was bouncing around on the balls of his feet. He was moving in and out, giving Cody a bit more to think about. But after Cody kind of timed it right and cracked him a couple of times and made him kind of respect his power, you could see that TJ was a little bit more flat-footed, a little bit more standing in just one position, not really moving around that much. As the second round went on, you kind of saw TJ get his swagger back about him. But Cody at this point was just brimming with confidence. He was dancing around the ring, the octagon. The ring? The octagon. I always trip over myself with that. He was dancing around the octagon and trying to make a fool of TJ as he did to Dominic Cruz before him. Now, in between rounds, more interestingly, TJ's coach, Dwayne Ludwig, between the first and the second round, told TJ to just throw kicks and not set them up, not to bother trying to set up the kicks with punches or moving in, just to throw them and see what would happen. And I think now that Dwayne Ludwig might be some sort of wizard, because he was exactly right. I think what he may have spotted was that Cody kind of fights with his hands down. He has his lead hand for his jab down quite low, and that leaves his chin exposed, obviously. So TJ just started throwing kicks. First couple were getting close. He was just throwing them, winging them at him. And a little later on into the second, he threw a head kick and it cracked Cody. Fucking cracked him. Put him on his arse. But Cody, being the tough bastard that he is, just bounced right back up onto his feet. Even after getting kicked in the fucking skull from TJ. I mean, it was an unbelievable strike. It was so good. But he got back up. He was visibly wobbly, though. He was clearly not himself. He was not with it. And then a couple of seconds later, I don't know, maybe like just under a minute or so later, a couple of exchanges later, TJ cracked Cody with a hard left hook. Just the timing of it was perfect. They were just swinging for the fences, and the accidental timing of it, because there was no way it was intended. It was a bit of a flurry. It was an accidentally timed like left hook that dropped Cody again. At which point TJ jumped on him and just pounded him out, pounded his face into the fucking mat, and then came away as the undisputed bantamweight champion. A title that he thinks he never lost. Which, in some senses, in some regards, I can agree. I've always thought that TJ was, like I said before, the epitome of the sport. What the perfect mixed martial artist looks like is TJ Dillashaw. Which makes what he said in his post-fight interview very interesting. He wants Demetrius Johnson next. He wants to drop a weight class, go down to flyweight and fight Demetrius Johnson. The pound-for-pound best mixed martial artist in the world, without a doubt, against TJ Dillashaw. Somebody who is very, very similar to Demetrius in that kind of fast-paced, frantic style, can pretty much do anything. Very, very excited to see that happen. But again, this is one of these fights where I thought Cody would fare better. I thought he would at least get through the fight and actually not get knocked out in the way he did, being such a prolific boxer that he is. But I suppose this thing's to the point that being well-rounded is very important. Cody is not well-rounded. He's not a well-rounded fighter. You saw him in the fight throwing leg kicks, and they had no power behind them. They had no real form or power. They were just basically to touch TJ, to make TJ aware that Cody was there. And I think that's where he fell down, relying so heavily on his perfect boxing skills. Because they are so good, he relies on it really heavily, and that lets him down. I think that lets him down when he comes up against guys like TJ Dillashaw, who can do everything. And he fell at the hand of that, which is a shame. I don't think it's the end of Cody, though. Without a shadow of a doubt, it's not the end of Cody. I think he will be back. I think he'll learn from this experience. I think he'll develop from it. He himself is pretty young as well. I think he's in his mid-20s too. I mean, a lot of these fighters now are getting younger and younger. So God knows what it's going to be like in in another 5 years or so when these guys are in their prime. It will be very, very exciting to see. And so after that fight, I was like, holy shit. We've had 2 title fights and 2 new champions. And I thought, what if we had 3 title fights and 3 new champions? That would be fucking ridiculous. And to be honest, I didn't think that was going to be a possibility. Not at all. But then you got to consider what the next fight was on the card. Michael Bisping versus George St-Pierre. Now, Michael Bisping is one of the toughest, hardest working fighters out there. I do not deny that. He isn't naturally talented. He isn't naturally talented. You can see that he isn't. He's not. You know, you see Anderson Silva in there, and you see, like, Anderson Silva's got something about him. He's tapped into the universe. He knows how the fucking Matrix works, or something like that. He's got a freak animal-like movement that doesn't seem human. Michael Bisping is the most human of fighters I've ever seen. And he's the most underrated of fighters as well. And he's got balls, and he's got a great work ethic, which is why he is in the position that he is in. Even if it took him fucking ages. I mean, this guy's got the highest amount of wins in the UFC. I think he's probably like been in the organisation as long as I've watched it, which is an incredible feat from Michael Bisping. I do think that luck is on his side quite a bit, especially in his last 2 fights. Now, his Luke Rockhold fight, I'm not going to call that luck, even though I think what happened in that Luke Rockhold fight was Rockhold didn't take Bisping seriously, and Bisping made him pay for it in dramatic fashion. I do, however, think Rockhold is the better fighter. I think Rockhold would beat Bisping had he have not been knocked out and been a bit of a prick about it. Now, the fights that followed the Rockhold fight, the ones where he's now defending his championship, Bisping fought Anderson Silva and won a controversial decision in my eyes. I thought Anderson Silva won that fight, to be honest. Anderson Silva fucked Bisping up, but he won the decision. And then the same argument could be made for his next fight, the Dan Henderson fight. You could argue that Dan Henderson won that fight. Again, it went to decision, and it went Bisping's way. I think that one was a little bit more tricky to call, but again, Bisping won it. And I think, to be honest, at this point, luck was on his side. You know, it was meant to be for him. Him becoming the champion and defending it twice against some legends. You know, it's a good thing to have on your fucking CV. So now he's going into this fight against George St-Pierre. Now this is a weird one because George St-Pierre he's the greatest welterweight of all time, potentially the greatest mixed martial artist of all time. Certainly a legend. And he returns after a 4-year hiatus and comes up to middleweight, goes a weight class above his typical home. He came in looking bigger, stronger, and according to him, in the best shape and in the best condition as a fighter that he has ever been in. But a lot of people were doubting it. A lot of people were doubting him. You know, he's had 4 years off. He's got a lot of like octagon rust. He's done no combat sport in that 4 years. So a lot of people were like, oh, this could be interesting. Bisping could get him on this one. Bisping, you know, works hard, and he's knowing it's GSP, he's like, okay, I need to work hard on this. And then GSP moving up a weight class. I mean, the guy's small anyway. He's quite short. He came into this fight packing on a lot of muscle. So there was some doubt surrounding GSP, but then you have to consider how fucking successful he was at welterweight in his prime. Well, in his prime? He's probably in his prime now. But how successful he was at welterweight on his last run in the UFC. He defended that belt 9 times. He's an absolute monster. Nobody could work out the puzzle of GSP in the welterweight division. And now you're leaving up to Michael Bisping, one of the luckiest / hardest working fighters in the UFC. So the fight starts. GSP begins to establish the jab. He's getting takedowns in the first. He looks like himself. He looks better than himself almost. He's got good movement. He's doing these weird wheel kicks that almost caught Bisping. He was getting the better of Bisping in the first round easily. He definitely won that round. In the second round, things began to turn for him. You could see that GSP was getting a little tired. He was taking deep breaths. And that's a bad thing when you're up against Michael Bisping, who is known as a cardio machine. This guy can fight for days without breaking a sweat. This is what he loves most. And it kind of goes towards his style, that hard work, hard graft style. It's made him have this phenomenal stamina that breaks down a lot of his opponents, where Bisping will be just as fresh in the 5th as he is in the 1st, even after taking a fucking beating. But GSP wasn't out of it. He wasn't out of it. He was tired, visibly tired. He was going for the takedowns. He was getting the takedowns, but Michael sprung back up on the first takedown, and on the second takedown, he got him in the middle of the octagon. So Michael couldn't use the cage to get up like he had been doing previously. But GSP wasn't really doing anything from the top. He was kind of holding him there, whilst Bisping was on the bottom, slicing him open with elbows, catching him hard, and cut his nose, cut the top of his forehead open. It's bleeding everywhere, blood in his eyes. Eventually, it went back to the feet. GSP visibly knackered. I think him not fighting for that long, that adrenaline dump that had happened, him being middleweight and a little bit bigger, it kind of took his toll on him. It took his toll on his body. You could see how deep his breaths were. And that's when the tide began to turn for Michael. He started walking him down, started striking a little bit more confidently because he could see GSP fading. And it made it very interesting. It was a fucking wonderful fight because of that. Because of the ebb and flow of it. So yeah, towards the end of the second, Bisping is getting his way with GSP. He's figuring him out. I think he's got him clocked, really. He knows that he's okay with the takedowns, because if he gets taken down, he can either A, get back up, or do some serious damage to GSP. So he's pretty safe now. He's a bit more confident in coming forward. Second round ends. We go into the third. GSP still looks a bit shaky, a little bit knackered. And then, seemingly out of fucking nowhere, with all that momentum that Bisping had on his side after the second, and all that confidence you could see in his body movements and in the way that he began to kind of land on GSP, out of nowhere, GSP fucking cracks Bisping, cracks him perfectly. I mean, in the slow down replays, Bisping's face when he gets hit by that punch from GSP is ridiculous. He looks like he's got his head hanging out of the window like a dog does, and all of his face is just pulled to one side and his eyeballs are just gone. Like, he looks dead as he is falling down to the ground. Then GSP senses his moment. He knows that he's knackered. He knows that he's losing his stamina and doesn't have the cardio to continue at Bisping's pace. So you can see in GSP's movements, he's like, right, this is it. He jumps on top of Bisping and he just starts hammering him with these vicious elbows and hammer fists, just trying to make this fight end. But where it gets really interesting is in the fact that these elbows and these strikes from GSP, this ground and pound, wasn't really effective. Michael was doing a good job. He kind of came to his senses and was defending these strikes. Now, this is why, what happened next is why GSP is one of the greatest of all time, and it proves that his fight IQ is absolutely wonderful. What he did was he knew that these punches were ineffective, and he said himself in the post-fight interview that he didn't want to try and force something that was clearly not working. So he laid off Michael a little bit, gave Michael a little bit of space, relieved that pressure off Michael. Michael then obviously sensed that, and him being a little bit foggy, granted, thinking that it would be a good opportunity for him to stand up, that he had defended the attack. So Michael rolls onto his knees to try and stand up. GSP knows what he's doing. He's just over him. He's letting him do this. He's letting him try and stand up. GSP then sees Michael on his knees, ready to get up. GSP pounces on his back, sinks in the tightest rear naked choke I've ever seen, and then chokes Michael Bisping unconscious. First off, Bisping doesn't fucking tap. He'd rather go to sleep. And it was the most perfect rear naked choke. The form of it was excellent. The technique was excellent. Bisping was screwed, and he went unconscious. George St-Pierre is back. He is now the middleweight champion of the UFC. He is one of only 4 other fighters to have championship belts in 2 different weight classes. The crowd goes fucking wild. Their king, their legend, the one who defined the sport for so fucking long and was unbeatable, had returned and retaken his crown. And it was incredible. It was really good to see GSP back in that way. I honestly thought that going into the third, that Bisping was going to do what he did to the other legends that he took down. He was just going to eke out the decision, that he was going to fight how he normally does, intelligently, and drag GSP into deep waters and make it a hell of a fight for him. And that's the way that the fight was going. That's the direction that this clash between these 2 legends was going. Because I think now you can rate Bisping as a legend of the sport, considering who he's fought, how many times he's fought, and what he's achieved. But man, GSP was not lying when he said he's back and better than ever. Because he was, man. He was great. So now what comes next for him? I mean, he has to fight Robert Whittaker now, the guy who's got the interim middleweight belt. And Robert Whittaker is no joke. He's legit. And it will be very, very exciting to see them two fight. I hope GSP sticks around now, and this just wasn't a grab the money and run situation. I don't think it was. I think this may be like him realising this is his last chance at glory, his last chance to compete before like time creeps up on him. So yeah, what a ridiculous weekend for UFC fans and mixed martial arts fans and sports fans, really. 3 title fights, 3 brand new champions, and like the entire world of the UFC, the entire ranking system of the UFC has been now shaken. And it's events like these that remind you why this sport is so fucking good. So good. You cannot fathom how ridiculous that is. How ridiculous that event was. How many ridiculous fights there were and how many just insane results. What a sport. What a fucking sport. Right, I'm going to leave it there. That is the Chatty Boy Podcast, episode number 3. Sorry for ranting about the UFC for God knows how long, but, man, it's taken over my life. It's all I've been able to think about for the past couple of days, so, sorry. And if you liked this episode of the Chatty Boy Podcast, or you're a fan of whatever else I'm doing on this channel, please share it with your friends, hit that subscribe button, give me a little thumbs up, and let me know what you thought of UFC 217 down in the comments below, or over on Twitter at DarylDoes. And in case you didn't already know, the Chatty Boy Podcast is on SoundCloud, so you can download it, just the audio version. You can download it and just listen to my wonderful, wonderful voice without having to look at my fugly little ginger face. And it's coming to iTunes, I promise. It's coming to iTunes. So, until next time, my friends. I've done 7 days without drinking now. It's been shit. Really, really would like a gin and tonic. Just got a hankering for a gin and tonic. December 1st can't come quick enough.